The text came at 3:27 on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing tenant applications for my downtown properties. "You have until Sunday to find somewhere else," my mother had written in all caps. No explanation, no warning, just 5 days to pack up my life and disappear from the apartment I'd called home for 3 years. My hands shook as I set down my phone next to the stack of lease agreements scattered across my desk. 24 buildings across the city, and my own family wanted to throw me out of my favorite one. I stared at the message for a full minute before my brain could process what Patricia, my mother, had actually written. The words blurred together as anger and confusion battled in my chest. 5 days? She was giving me 5 days to uproot my entire life from the cozy 2-bedroom apartment that overlooked Riverside Park, the place where I'd finally found peace after years of chaotic family drama. My fingers trembled as I pressed her contact number. The phone rang 3 times before her crisp voice answered. "Susanna Good, I was hoping you'd call." "Mom, what is this about? Why do I need to find somewhere else? Did something happen to the building?" Patricia's tone remained cold, businesslike. "Your sister needs this apartment more than you do. Brianna's struggling financially, and frankly, it's time you stop hoarding money while living in the nicest place when you could easily find somewhere smaller." The words hit me like a physical blow. Hoarding money. I'd been called many things in my 32 years, but never greedy. Not when I'd spent my entire childhood giving up everything from Halloween candy to Christmas gifts just to keep the family peace. "I don't understand. This is my home. I've been paying rent here for 3 years without a single late payment." "And you can afford to pay rent somewhere else just as easily," Patricia snapped. "Brianna has been through enough with Trevor losing his job. She deserves some stability, and this apartment would be perfect for them to get back on their feet." My mouth went dry. "You're kicking me out to give my apartment to Brianna." "I'm asking you to be compassionate toward your sister who actually needs help. You've always been fine on your own, Susanna. You'll figure something out like you always do." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. I sank into my leather desk chair surrounded by property management documents that suddenly felt like evidence of a secret life my family couldn't imagine I possessed. For 8 years, I'd carefully built a real estate empire worth millions, and my own mother thought I was struggling to afford a modest apartment. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so devastating. My phone buzzed with notifications from Instagram. Against my better judgment, I opened the app and navigated to Brianna's profile. What I saw there made my stomach lurch. 3 hours ago, while I'd been analyzing profit margins from my commercial properties, my younger sister had posted a series of photos labeled "New Apartment Vibes." The first image showed a mood board featuring sage green paint samples, brass fixtures, and expensive-looking furniture arrangements. The second was a screenshot of a Pinterest board titled "Brianna's Dream Home Makeover." The third showed her holding paint swatches against a wall I recognized immediately as my living room. My living room. The caption read, "Finally getting the fresh start I deserve. Can't wait to transform this gorgeous space into something truly special. Housewarming party planned for next weekend. Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need when you need it most." The comments below made me nauseous. Friends and family members had already started congratulating her, offering to help with the move, asking about the housewarming party. Our cousin Derek had written, "About time you guys deserve this after everything you've been through." Aunt Helen had added, "Such a beautiful space, I'm so happy for you both." I scrolled further and found posts from yesterday showing Brianna at Home Depot, selecting doorknobs and light fixtures. Another post from this morning showed her meeting with what appeared to be a contractor outside my building, discussing timeline estimates for renovations that would apparently begin on Monday. My phone rang, startling me from my spiral. Marcus Chen, my property manager, appeared on the caller ID. I'd worked with Marcus for 6 years, and his timing was usually impeccable. Susanna, I have 3 new tenant inquiries for the Harrison Street complex. Are you available to review applications this afternoon? Marcus. I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. I need to ask you something. The Riverside Park building where I live. The lease management for Unit 4B, is that still going through Morrison Property Group? Yes, just like we set up when you moved in. Keeps everything clean and separate from your ownership identity. Why do you ask? I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. Morrison Property Group was one of 3 shell companies I used to maintain anonymity as a landlord. My own family had no idea that when they paid rent to Morrison Property Group, they were actually paying me. My family is trying to evict me from my own building, Marcus. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds before Marcus's professional composure slipped. I'm sorry, what? I explained the situation as objectively as possible, watching Marcus's initial confusion transform into what sounded like barely suppressed amazement. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Susanna, in 6 years of managing your properties, I've never seen you lose your temper or act impulsively, but I have to ask what you want me to do here, because legally you could evict every single one of your family members tomorrow if you wanted to. The thought hadn't occurred to me, but as Marcus said it, something shifted in my chest. For 32 years, I'd been the family peacekeeper, the middle child who absorbed conflict and smoothed over tensions, the daughter who never demanded attention or caused problems, the sister who stepped aside whenever Brianna needed something, whether it was the bigger bedroom, the better Christmas gifts, or the spotlight at family gatherings. But I'd also been building something none of them knew about. While they dismissed me as quiet, unremarkable Susanna, I'd been quietly acquiring property after property, turning a modest inheritance from my grandfather into a multi-million-dollar portfolio. I owned buildings in 3 different neighborhoods, including the trendy downtown district where property values had tripled in the past 5 years. And now they wanted to throw me out of my own home because they assumed I was too weak and too poor to fight back. Don't do anything yet, I told Marcus. I need to think about this. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my apartment looking out at the city lights reflected in the river below. 24 buildings, 68 rental units, 2 commercial spaces, and a small office complex. I'd built all of this by being patient, strategic, and invisible. But maybe it was time to stop being invisible. My phone buzzed again. Another Instagram notification from Brianna, this time, a story showing her FaceTiming with friends, the camera panning across what were clearly moving boxes already packed and labeled kitchen, bedroom, living room. She wasn't just planning to take my apartment. She'd already started moving. Thursday evening arrived with an unexpected invitation from my cousin Derek and his wife Amanda. They'd texted asking me to join them for dinner, nothing unusual since we'd maintained a closer relationship than I had with most of my extended family. Derek had always been the diplomatic one among the cousins, and Amanda was genuinely kind, so I welcomed the distraction from my family crisis. Their house in the Elmwood district was a charming craftsman-style rental that I'd admired since they'd moved in 2 years ago. Amanda greeted me at the door with what seemed like forced brightness, and Derek's usual warm hug felt strangely brief. As we settled around their dining table, I noticed an uncomfortable tension that hadn't been there during our last visit. So, Amanda began passing a bowl of roasted vegetables with unnecessary vigor. Derek and I have been talking about family responsibility lately. I paused a forkful of salmon halfway to my mouth. Family responsibility. Derek cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. Well, you know how things have been tough for Brianna and Trevor since he lost his job. We've all been thinking about how we can help family members who are struggling. The words felt rehearsed, like they'd practiced this conversation before I arrived. A cold realization began forming in my stomach. I'm not sure what you mean. Amanda leaned forward, her expression earnest but slightly accusatory. Susanna, we know you inherited money when your grandfather passed away. That's wonderful, truly. But when family members are facing real hardship, while others have the means to help but choose not to, well, it raises questions about our values. My fork clattered against my plate. Excuse me. Brianna told us about your inheritance, Derek said quietly. She mentioned that you've been living very comfortably while she and Trevor have been struggling to make ends meet. The thing is, we've noticed some things too. Your car, your clothes, the fact that you never seem worried about money. It's just that when you have family members who are really suffering... What exactly did Brianna tell you about my supposed inheritance? Amanda and Derek exchanged glances. She said your grandfather left you a substantial amount, Amanda replied carefully. Enough that you could easily help Trevor and Brianna get back on their feet, maybe help with rent or a security deposit somewhere. She's been really hurt that you haven't offered to help, especially now that they're losing their apartment. I sat back in my chair, my appetite completely gone. They're not losing their apartment. Trevor lost his job, but as far as I know, they haven't been evicted. Not yet, Derek said. But Trevor's unemployment benefits aren't enough to cover their expenses long term. Brianna's been asking family members for small loans just to buy groceries. She's been really stressed about having to ask for help while knowing that you could easily afford to assist them. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than I'd imagined. How long has she been having these conversations with family members? A few weeks, Amanda admitted. She called me crying last month, saying she was embarrassed to ask for help when she knew you had inherited money, but seemed unwilling to share it with family. She's been really hurt, Susanna. She feels like you've become distant and selfish since your grandfather died. My grandfather had passed away 8 years ago, leaving me $50,000 that had served as the down payment for my first investment property. That initial investment had grown into my current empire through careful planning, market research, and reinvestment of profits. But clearly, Brianna had been spinning a very different story for weeks. Has she told you anything else about my financial situation? Derek shifted uncomfortably. She mentioned that you seem to have expensive tastes lately, new clothes, eating at nice restaurants. She said it's been painful watching you live so well while she's been struggling to afford basic necessities. And no one thought to ask me directly about any of this. The silence that followed was answer enough. My own family had been discussing my supposed greed and selfishness for weeks, accepting Brianna's version of events without question. My phone rang, interrupting the tense moment. Aunt Helen's name appeared on the screen, and something in my expression must have alarmed Derek and Amanda. Helen, hi. Is everything okay? Susanna, honey, I need to talk to you privately. Are you somewhere you can speak freely? I glanced at Derek and Amanda, who were pretending not to listen while clearly hanging on every word. Not really. Can I call you back in an hour? This can't wait. I just got off the phone with Patricia and I'm furious. I need to warn you about what's been happening behind your back. My heart rate accelerated. What do you mean? Helen's voice was tight with anger. Patricia has been telling people at church that she's disappointed in your lack of compassion toward your sister. She's been painting you as selfish and materialistic, claiming you've forgotten your family values since inheriting money. But Susanna, I've been watching Brianna's behavior for months, and something doesn't add up. I stepped away from the table, moving toward Derek and Amanda's living room for a semblance of privacy. What doesn't add up? Brianna's story about Trevor's job loss keeps changing. First, she said he was laid off due to company downsizing. Then she said it was temporary reduction in force. But last week, I ran into Trevor's former supervisor at the grocery store. He told me Trevor was fired for excessive absences and showing up late repeatedly. That's not a man who lost his job due to economic hardship, Susanna. That's someone who got fired for poor performance. The information hit me like a physical blow. Are you certain? Completely certain. And there's more. Brianna has been asking different family members for money, but she's been telling each person that they're the only one she's asked. She borrowed $300 from your Uncle Robert last month, telling him she was behind on electric bills. She asked me for $500 2 weeks ago, claiming they needed money for Trevor's job interview clothes. Yesterday, she asked Derek for money for groceries. I glanced back at Derek, who was still sitting at the dinner table but obviously straining to hear my conversation. Helen, has Patricia been part of these conversations about my supposed inheritance? That's what makes me so angry. Patricia has been actively encouraging the family narrative that you're being selfish. She told me last Sunday after church that she was deeply disappointed in how money had changed you, and that she was considering taking action to teach you about family loyalty. I thought she meant having a conversation with you, but now I'm wondering if she meant something more drastic. My blood turned to ice. More drastic how? I don't know exactly, but Patricia mentioned that sometimes children need to learn lessons about what really matters. She said something about how you'd always been too independent, and that maybe it was time you experienced real consequences for putting money before family. The conversation I'd had with Patricia on Tuesday suddenly took on a more sinister dimension. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision to give Brianna my apartment. This was a calculated plan to punish me for imagined selfishness. Helen, I need to tell you something, but I need you to promise to keep it between us for now. Of course, honey. I didn't just inherit $50,000 8 years ago. I used that money as an investment, and I've built a business from it. A very successful business. The money Brianna thinks I'm hoarding doesn't exist the way she imagines it. I've been reinvesting everything I make. What kind of business? I took a deep breath. Real estate. I own rental properties. How many properties? 24 buildings. The silence on Helen's end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Susanna, did you just say 24 buildings? Yes. And Helen, the apartment Patricia is trying to force me out of, I own that building too. Oh my God. When I hung up with Helen and returned to the dinner table, Derek and Amanda were watching me with expressions I couldn't quite read. The rest of dinner passed in awkward small talk, but I could feel their assessment of me shifting with each passing minute. As I prepared to leave, Amanda walked me to the door. Susanna, I owe you an apology. We shouldn't have assumed things about your situation without talking to you directly. It's okay, I said, though it really wasn't. But Amanda, I need you to understand something. The story you've heard about my inheritance and my supposed selfishness, it's not accurate. And the narrative about Trevor's job loss isn't accurate either. Her face flushed with embarrassment. What do you mean? I mean that sometimes the people asking for help aren't being honest about why they need it. And sometimes the people who appear successful aren't actually the villains in the story. I left Derek and Amanda's house with my phone buzzing constantly. Messages from various family members, all suddenly very interested in my weekend plans and my thoughts about family support during difficult times. But the message that stopped me cold came from Brianna herself. Moving truck scheduled for Saturday morning. Can't wait to start fresh in such a beautiful space. Thanks for understanding that sometimes family comes first. She was thanking me for giving up my home, for a situation I'd never agreed to. As I drove home through the city streets lined with buildings I owned, but could never claim, I realized that my family's betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about an apartment or about money. This was about a fundamental belief that I was disposable, that my needs and feelings mattered less than everyone else's, and that I would always comply with their demands because I always had before. But what they didn't understand was that the quiet, compliant Susanna they remembered had spent 8 years building something they couldn't imagine. And that version of myself was about to make some choices that would surprise everyone. Friday evening, I sat in my car outside Patricia's house in the Westfield neighborhood, gathering courage for the conversation I'd been avoiding my entire adult life. The house looked exactly as it had during my childhood: beige siding, small front porch, carefully maintained garden that Patricia treated like a personal shrine. I'd spent countless hours in that living room, being lectured about family loyalty and being a good daughter, learning to absorb criticism and smooth over conflict until it became my defining characteristic. Tonight would be different. I found Patricia and Brianna in the kitchen, hunched over what appeared to be floor plans spread across the table. They looked up as I entered through the back door I'd used since childhood, and for a moment neither of them seemed to register my expression. "Susanna." Brianna jumped up with fabricated enthusiasm. "Perfect timing. We were just finalizing the layout for the apartment renovations. I think you're going to love what we're planning to do with the space." "We're planning—" Patricia stood more slowly, her expression guarded. "Brianna's been working very hard on plans to make the apartment beautiful. She's putting a lot of thought into respecting the space while making it work for her needs." I looked down at the papers scattered across the table. Detailed sketches showed my apartment completely transformed, walls removed, fixtures, replaced my beloved reading nook converted into a home office. The plans were professional quality, clearly expensive, and represented hours of work. "When did you have time to make these plans?" Brianna's smile faltered slightly. "I've been working on them for a few weeks. I wanted to be ready to move quickly once everything was settled." "A few weeks?" I kept my voice level despite the fury building in my chest. "You've been planning renovations for my apartment for weeks." "Your apartment?" Patricia's voice sharpened. "Susanna, we discussed this. The apartment belongs to whoever needs it most, and right now that's Brianna." "Actually, Mother, the apartment belongs to whoever's name is on the deed." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia set down the coffee mug she'd been holding with deliberate precision. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. The apartment belongs to whoever owns the building, which means it belongs to me." Brianna laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the kitchen walls. "Susanna, what are you talking about? You rent that apartment just like everyone else in the building." "No, Brianna. I own that apartment because I own the building it's in." The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of Patricia's old refrigerator. Both women stared at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. "That's impossible," Patricia said finally. "You don't have that kind of money." "Actually, I do. I have exactly that kind of money because I've been building a real estate business for 8 years. Brianna's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked like panic. "You're lying." "I'm not lying. I'm also not homeless, not struggling financially, and not hoarding inheritance money while family members starve. The story you've been telling everyone about my supposed selfishness is based on assumptions that are completely wrong." Patricia sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her face pale. "Susanna, if you had money, real money, why didn't you tell us—" "Because every time I've been successful at anything, this family has found ways to diminish it, take credit for it, or demand that I share it in ways that weren't healthy for anyone involved." "That's not true," Brianna protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? Remember when I got the academic scholarship to state? You convinced Mom I should turn it down because it wasn't fair that I got opportunities you didn't have. When I got my first job promotion, you spent the entire family dinner talking about how unfair corporate favoritism was. Every achievement I've made has somehow become a problem this family needed to solve. Patricia's expression shifted from confusion to defensive anger. We were trying to keep you humble, Susanna. Success can change people, make them forget where they came from. What you were doing was making sure I never got too far ahead of everyone else. And it worked. I learned to hide my achievements to avoid family conflict. So you've been lying to us for years. The accusation hit me like a slap. I've been protecting myself and protecting this family from conflicts that didn't need to exist. But I'm done protecting people who think so little of me that they'd throw me out of my own home without a conversation. Brianna stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. This is ridiculous. Even if you have some money saved up, that doesn't mean you own buildings. That's not how real estate works. Actually, that's exactly how real estate works. You buy properties, you improve them, you rent them out, you use the income to buy more properties. It's called investing, and I've been very good at it. How much money are we talking about here? Patricia asked quietly. Enough that I could write a check tomorrow and buy 5 houses like this one without affecting my monthly budget. The words hung in the air like an explosion. Brianna sat down heavily, her face flushed with what I now recognized as embarrassment. Brianna, how long have you known? My sister's eyes darted between Patricia and me. Known what? How long have you suspected I had money? The pause was too long and Patricia noticed it too. Brianna. Last year, she said finally, I saw her at a property management conference downtown. She was wearing clothes that cost more than my entire wardrobe, and she was talking to people about expansion strategies and market analysis. I Googled some of the terms I heard her use, and they were all related to commercial real estate investment. You've known for a year. Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. I wasn't completely sure, Brianna said defensively. But I started paying attention to things. Her car, her clothes, the fact that she never seems stressed about money. I thought maybe she'd gotten lucky with some investments or something. So when you came to me saying Susanna was hoarding inheritance money while you struggled, you already suspected she'd earned her own money legitimately. Brianna's silence was answer enough. My youngest brother Danny chose that moment to arrive, letting himself in through the front door with the casual familiarity of someone who'd never learned to knock. He walked into the kitchen carrying takeout bags, took one look at our faces, and stopped dead. Okay, what happened? Did someone die? Danny, Patricia said slowly, sit down. We need to have a family conversation. Actually, I said, standing up and gathering my purse. I think this conversation is over. Susanna, wait. Danny set down the food and looked around the room with growing alarm. Seriously, what's going on? Why does everyone look like they've seen a ghost? Your sister owns the apartment building where she lives, Patricia said flatly. Apparently, she's been running a real estate business for years and never told us. Danny blinked several times. Susanna owns real estate. Multiple properties, Brianna added bitterly. Danny looked at me with something approaching admiration. That's amazing. How did you learn to do that? The simple question asked without judgment or resentment nearly brought me to tears. I read books, took classes, started small, and reinvested everything I made. That's incredibly smart, Danny said. Why is everyone acting like it's a bad thing? Because, Patricia said, her voice rising, she's been living like she's struggling, while her family members have been asking for help she could easily afford to give. But Mom, Danny said, frowning, didn't you teach us that family members aren't obligated to give each other money? You always said that financial independence was important and that we shouldn't expect handouts. That's different. How is it different? The question hung in the air without an answer because there wasn't a good one. The truth was that my family had never expected me to be the successful one, and my success upset the established order they'd grown comfortable with. "Danny," I said quietly, "I need you to understand something. Your mother and Brianna are trying to force me out of my apartment so Brianna can move into it. They've been telling family members that I'm selfish and greedy because I haven't offered to financially support Brianna and Trevor." Danny's expression darkened. "They're trying to kick you out of your apartment." "Out of her apartment in a building she owns," I corrected. "Wait." Danny turned to stare at Patricia and Brianna. "You were going to evict her from her own building." "We didn't know she owned it," Patricia protested. "But you were going to evict her without owning it yourselves." The logic of Danny's question hung heavy in the kitchen. Patricia had been planning to force me out of an apartment she had no legal right to based on her assumption that I was too weak and too poor to fight back. "I think," I said, picking up my purse, "everyone needs time to process this information, but I want to be very clear about one thing: I will not be moving out of my apartment. I will not be funding Brianna's lifestyle while she spreads lies about my character, and I will not be participating in family gatherings that involve plotting against me." "Susanna, please," Patricia said, standing up. "We can work this out. We just need to talk about this as a family." "We did talk about it as a family. You talked about it with everyone except me. You made decisions about my life without consulting me. You planned to punish me for crimes I didn't commit based on assumptions you never verified." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "And Patricia, you should know that tomorrow morning you'll be receiving some official paperwork related to your own housing situation. You might want to read it carefully." I left them sitting in that kitchen surrounded by renovation plans for an apartment they'd never have access to, trying to process the reality that the family member they'd dismissed as weak and unremarkable had actually spent 8 years building something they'd never imagined possible. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with increasingly frantic text messages from Brianna and Patricia, but I didn't read them. I had planning to do. Saturday morning found me in the downtown office of Catherine Walsh, the attorney who'd been handling my property acquisitions for the past 5 years. Catherine's corner office overlooked the financial district, and her reputation for protecting real estate investors was legendary in our circles. I'd called her Friday night after leaving Patricia's house, and she'd agreed to an emergency weekend meeting. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Catherine said, reviewing the notes she'd taken during my explanation. "Your family believes you're financially struggling. They're trying to evict you from your own property, and they've been running a character assassination campaign based on completely false information." "That's accurate." Catherine leaned back in her leather chair, her expression a mix of professional outrage and personal indignation. "Susanna, in 5 years of working with you, I've watched you build one of the most impressive real estate portfolios I've seen from a single investor. Your business acumen is extraordinary. The idea that anyone would characterize you as financially irresponsible is absurd." "Thank you, but right now I need advice on how to handle this situation without destroying my family relationships completely." "Understood. But first I need to ask, how far are you willing to go to protect yourself and your assets?" I thought about the question for several seconds. "What do you mean?" "I mean that your family's behavior constitutes harassment and potentially fraud, depending on how much money your sister has collected from relatives under false pretenses. You have legal options ranging from simple boundary setting to serious legal consequences. How aggressive do you want to be?" The question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. My entire adult life had been spent managing my family's emotions and protecting them from consequences they'd earned. But their willingness to humiliate me publicly and steal my home had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I want them to understand that their actions have consequences, I said finally, but I don't want to destroy them. Catherine nodded, making notes. Smart approach. Strategic pressure without nuclear options. I can work with that. What did you have in mind? Well, let's start with the fact that your mother is currently a tenant in one of your buildings. I paused my coffee cup halfway to my lips. Excuse me. Catherine pulled out a file folder and spread several documents across her desk. The Westfield Neighborhood Maple Street Unit 3A. Your mother has been renting from Morrison Property Group for 2 years. My mind reeled as I stared at the lease agreement bearing Patricia's signature. I had no idea. Marcus handles all the tenant screening and lease management. It's a small 1-bedroom apartment in the building you acquired as part of the Westfield expansion project. Market rate rent, good tenant history, no late payments. She's been an excellent renter. The irony was staggering. For 2 years, Patricia had been unknowingly paying rent to her own daughter while simultaneously criticizing that daughter's financial choices. Catherine, what are my options here? Legally, you have every right to issue a standard 30-day notice of non-renewal when her lease expires next month. Since she's month-to-month now, you could also issue a 30-day notice to vacate with cause if she's violated lease terms. Has she violated lease terms? Catherine's smile was sharp. Harassment of the property owner by a tenant definitely qualifies as lease violation in most jurisdictions. My phone rang, interrupting our strategizing session. Marcus appeared on the caller ID, and I put him on speaker with Catherine's permission. Susanna, we have a situation. I just received a very interesting phone call from someone claiming to be your sister, asking about rental availability in your premium buildings. She specifically mentioned having insider knowledge that might help her get preferred pricing. Catherine and I exchanged glances. What kind of insider knowledge? She claimed to be related to the owner and suggested that family relationships should result in reduced rent and waived security deposits. When I explained that I couldn't discuss owner relationships, she became quite aggressive and demanded to speak to my supervisor. Did you tell her who the owner was? Of course not. But I did explain that attempting to use false claims about relationships with property owners to obtain preferential treatment could be considered fraud. Catherine leaned toward the phone. Marcus, this is Catherine Walsh, Susanna's attorney. I need you to document that conversation in detail and email me a written summary within the hour. Absolutely. There's something else, though. I've received 3 other calls this morning from people claiming to be related to the owner of various properties. They're all asking about rental discounts and referring to conversations they've had with family members about available units. My stomach dropped. How many people has Brianna talked to? Based on these calls, it sounds like she's been making promises to multiple relatives about getting them favorable rental terms once she works things out with the property owner. Catherine was taking rapid notes. Marcus, I need you to call each of those people back and clarify that no family discounts exist, and that anyone claiming to offer such arrangements is misrepresenting the company's policies. After hanging up with Marcus, Catherine and I spent the next hour developing what she called a strategic response plan. The goal was to establish clear boundaries and consequences without causing permanent family damage. First, Catherine said, we issue the 30-day notice to your mother today. This gets her attention and demonstrates that actions have consequences. Won't that seem vindictive? It's not vindictive if it's documented response to lease violations. The harassment campaign she's been running against you qualifies. What's step 2? We schedule a family meeting for tomorrow where you reveal the extent of your property ownership and establish new ground rules for family interactions. And step 3? Catherine's expression became serious. We prepare for the possibility that your family won't respond reasonably to boundaries and consequences. Some people escalate when they lose control, and we need to be ready for that. An hour later, I sat in my car outside Patricia's apartment building, watching Marcus walk up to her front door carrying an envelope containing her 30-day notice to vacate. The building was a charming converted Victorian that I'd purchased during the Westfield neighborhood revitalization 2 years ago. I'd chosen neutral paint colors and classic fixtures that honored the building's historic character while providing modern amenities. Patricia had no idea she was living in one of my properties, but she was about to find out in the most official way possible. My phone buzzed with a text from James the architect I'd been quietly dating for 6 months. "How did the attorney meeting go? Are you okay?" James Crawford was everything my family wasn't supportive, encouraging about my success, and genuinely impressed by my business acumen rather than threatened by it. We'd met at a property development conference, and our relationship had grown slowly as I learned to trust someone with the truth about my life. "More complicated than expected," I texted back. "Dinner tonight, I need to tell you about the latest developments." "Of course. Your place or mine?" I thought about the question. My apartment was beautiful, peaceful, and entirely mine. For the first time in days, I wanted to be there with someone who valued both the space and the woman who'd created it. "My place. I'm cooking." 20 minutes after Marcus delivered the notice to Patricia, my phone rang. Her name on the caller ID made my heart race, but I was ready for the conversation. "Susanna, what is this?" "It's a 30-day notice to vacate, Mother. You're being asked to find alternative housing." This is from Morrison Property Group. I don't understand how this relates to our family situation." "Morrison Property Group is one of my companies. You've been renting from me for 2 years. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Finally, her voice came back smaller and more confused than I'd ever heard it. "You own my building." "I own your building. I also own Derek and Amanda's house, the strip mall where Brianna likes to shop, and 21 other properties around the city." "That's impossible." "It's documented fact, Patricia. And frankly, you've spent the past week trying to evict me from my own property while living in another one of my properties. The irony isn't lost on me." "Susanna, I don't understand any of this." "I know you don't. That's why we're going to have a family meeting tomorrow where I explain everything. But Patricia, I need you to understand something right now. The daughter you thought was weak and disposable has been taking care of this family in ways you never imagined. And that same daughter has reached her limit for abuse." I ended the call before she could respond, but I could imagine her sitting in her small apartment looking around at space she'd never realized belonged to her supposedly struggling daughter. The rest of Saturday passed in a blur of phone calls from various family members as word spread about Patricia's eviction notice. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I spent the afternoon cooking dinner for James and preparing for what would either be the most important family conversation of my life or the end of my relationship with most of my relatives. When James arrived at 7 with wine and flowers, he found me standing at my kitchen island surrounded by property deeds and financial documents. "Planning to wallpaper the living room with legal paperwork?" he asked, kissing my cheek. "Planning to show my family exactly who they've been trying to destroy," I replied. He listened without interruption as I explained the week's events occasionally, asking clarifying questions, but mostly just providing the steady support I desperately needed. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Susanna, you know this isn't about money, right? This is about control. Your family has had a certain dynamic for 32 years, and your success threatens that dynamic." "I know. The question is whether they can adapt to a new dynamic, or whether some relationships are going to end tomorrow." James reached across the counter and took my hand. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you for finally standing up for yourself. You've built something incredible, and you deserve to be celebrated for it, not punished. As we sat on my couch later that evening looking out at the city lights reflected in the river, I realized that regardless of how my family responded to tomorrow's revelations, I'd already won the most important victory. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing self-respect over family peace, and it felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Sunday afternoon arrived gray and drizzling, matching the mood as I prepared for what I'd privately labeled the reckoning. I'd asked Derek and Amanda to host the family meeting at their house, partly because it was neutral territory, and partly because they deserved to learn about their own housing situation before anyone else did. By 2:00, the living room was crowded with relatives I rarely saw outside of holidays. Patricia sat stiffly on the couch, her face showing the strain of a sleepless night. Brianna and Trevor occupied the love seat, both looking defensive and confused. Danny had claimed the armchair closest to me, clearly positioning himself as an ally. Aunt Helen and Uncle Robert represented the extended family contingent, while Derek and Amanda hovered nervously in their own living room, like guests at their own party. "I appreciate everyone coming." I began standing near the fireplace with a folder of documents in my hands. "I know this has been a confusing week for all of us, and I think it's time for complete honesty about my financial situation." "Susanna," Patricia interrupted. "Before you begin, I need to apologize for the eviction notice confusion. I don't understand how Morrison Property Group is connected to our family situation, but clearly there's been some kind of mistake." There's been no mistake, Mother. Morrison Property Group is one of 3 shell companies I use to manage my real estate investments." Uncle Robert leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of real estate investments?" I opened my folder and pulled out the first property deed. 8 years ago, Grandpa Michael left me $50,000. I used that money as a down payment on a small duplex in the University District. "We remember," Aunt Helen said gently. "You were very grateful for his gift." "I was. But instead of spending that money or letting it sit in savings, I decided to invest it. The duplex generated rental income which I used to save for a second property, then a third. Over 8 years, I've reinvested every dollar of profit into acquiring more properties." Trevor shifted uncomfortably. "How many properties are we talking about?" 24 buildings containing a total of 68 rental units and 2 commercial spaces." The silence in the room was absolute. Derek's face had gone pale, and I realized he was beginning to understand the implications of what I was saying. "Derek, Amanda," I said gently, "I need to tell you that this house you've been renting for 2 years is one of my properties." Amanda's hand flew to her mouth. "What?" The Elmwood District Revitalization Project included 12 houses that were being sold as rental investments. I bought 6 of them, including this one. Derek stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. "You're our landlord." "I'm your landlord. Just like I'm Patricia's landlord. Just like I'm the landlord for the building where Aunt Helen's friend Carol lives and the small office complex where Uncle Robert's accounting firm leases space." Uncle Robert's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "My office building, Riverside Professional Complex. You've been one of my commercial tenants for 3 years." The room erupted in overlapping voices as family members began processing the scope of what I'd revealed. Patricia's voice cut through the chaos. "This is impossible. You don't have this kind of money." I pulled out a folder containing financial statements and handed it to her. "Actually, I do. These are last quarter's profit and loss statements from my property management company." Patricia's hand shook as she opened the folder. Her eyes widened as she scanned the numbers, and she nearly dropped the papers when she reached the bottom line. "This says your quarterly profit was more than I make in 2 years." "That's correct." Brianna snatched the papers from Patricia's hands, her face cycling through disbelief, embarrassment, and something that looked like rage. This has to be fake. It's not fake. Marcus, my property manager, is outside in his car with additional documentation if anyone would like to verify the information. I walked to the window and waved to Marcus, who'd been waiting for my signal. He entered the house carrying a briefcase full of property deeds, tenant agreements, and business licenses. This is Marcus Chen, my property manager for the past 6 years. Marcus, would you mind explaining to my family how our business operates? Marcus set his briefcase on Derek's coffee table and began spreading out documents with professional efficiency. Morrison Property Group, Riverside Development Company, and Walsh Holdings are the 3 entities Susanna uses to acquire and manage rental properties. We currently maintain 68 residential units and 2 commercial spaces across 3 neighborhoods with an average occupancy rate of 96% and gross annual revenues of approximately $1.4 million. Uncle Robert had gone completely silent, staring at the property deed for his office building. Derek was examining the lease agreement for his own house, his expression shifting between amazement and embarrassment. "Susanna," Derek said finally, "we've been paying you rent for 2 years." "Yes. And we've been participating in family conversations about your supposed financial struggles." "Yes." Amanda buried her face in her hands. "Oh God, we're such idiots!" "You're not idiots," I said firmly. "You believed the information you were given by people you trusted. That's normal human behavior." Brianna had been unusually quiet during Marcus's presentation, but she suddenly exploded into anger. "This is ridiculous. Even if you have some money saved up, that doesn't give you the right to manipulate us or make us feel bad for asking for family support." "I haven't manipulated anyone, Brianna. I've been living quietly and minding my own business while you've been running a campaign to portray me as selfish and greedy." "Because you are selfish and greedy. You've had all this money and you've never offered to help when Trevor lost his job or when we needed support." Danny stood up, his face flushed with anger. "Brianna, you've been lying to everyone for weeks. You told us Trevor was laid off, but he was fired for missing work. You've been borrowing money from different family members while pretending each person was the only one you'd asked. How is that Susanna's fault?" "Stay out of this, Danny." "I won't stay out of it. Susanna has been building something incredible while you've been tearing her down with lies. And now you're angry because she didn't fund your lifestyle while you were spreading rumors about her character." Trevor had been silent throughout the entire meeting, but he finally spoke up. "Brianna, we need to stop this." Everyone turned to look at him. His face was flushed with what appeared to be shame. "What do you mean?" Brianna demanded. "I mean, we need to stop pretending that Susanna owes us anything. I lost my job because I wasn't doing my job. We've been living beyond our means for 2 years, trying to keep up with what we thought was Susanna's lifestyle. We bought furniture we couldn't afford, took vacations we couldn't pay for, and ran up credit card debt trying to look successful." "Trevor, shut up." "I won't shut up. Susanna didn't owe us money then, and she doesn't owe us money now. We created our own financial problems, and instead of fixing them, we blamed her for not solving them." Aunt Helen had been quietly reviewing property documents while the rest of us argued. She looked up with an expression of genuine admiration. "Susanna, honey, this is extraordinary. You've built a business empire from a $50,000 inheritance. That takes intelligence, discipline, and courage." "Thank you, Helen. But I have to ask, why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling?" The question I'd been dreading hung in the air, and I realized there was no way to answer it without revealing some painful truths about our family dynamics. "Because every time I've achieved something, this family has found ways to diminish it or demand that I share it in ways that weren't healthy for anyone. I learned early that it was easier to hide my successes than to deal with the conflict they created. Patricia had been silent since reviewing my financial statements, but she finally looked up with tears in her eyes. Susanna, is that really how you see us? It's how I've experienced us, Mother. When I got the scholarship to state, Brianna convinced you I should turn it down because it wasn't fair. When I got promoted at my first job, the entire family dinner was spent discussing how corporate favoritism was unfair to other people. I learned that my achievements were problems this family needed to solve rather than successes worth celebrating. That's not what we meant to do. But that's what you did. And this week, when you decided I was hoarding money and needed to be punished, you did it again. You made assumptions about my life, told other people those assumptions as facts, and planned to take action against me without ever having a conversation to verify whether your assumptions were correct. The room fell quiet as the weight of what I'd said settled over everyone. Derek was the first to speak. Susanna, I owe you a huge apology. We should never have believed stories about your character without talking to you directly. I appreciate that, Derek. But I need to ask, what happens now? What happens to our rental arrangement? It was a fair question and one I'd spent considerable time thinking about. Nothing changes immediately. You're good tenants, you pay rent on time, and you take care of the property. But I think we all need to have honest conversations about boundaries and expectations going forward. Patricia wiped her eyes with a tissue Helen had handed her. Susanna, what can we do to fix this? I don't know yet, Mother. That's going to depend on whether this family can accept that I'm successful without making it a problem that needs to be solved. As the meeting began to break up, various family members approached me with mixtures of apology and admiration. Derek and Amanda were embarrassed but gracious. Uncle Robert was quietly impressed. Aunt Helen was proud. But Brianna left without speaking to me, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. I had the feeling the real confrontation was still to come. Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor to my apartment. I was reviewing tenant applications over coffee when my doorman called to announce that Brianna was in the lobby asking to come up. Against my better judgment, I agreed to see her. She arrived at my door carrying what appeared to be a peace offering, a tray of coffee from my favorite downtown bakery, and a tentative smile that didn't reach her eyes. I brought breakfast, she said, holding up the tray. I was hoping we could talk. I led her into my living room, the same space she'd been planning to renovate without my permission just days earlier. She set the coffee on my glass coffee table and settled onto the cream-colored sofa that had been featured in her Instagram renovation plans. Susanna, I owe you an apology. Go on. Brianna took a shaky breath. I was wrong to spread stories about you without talking to you first. I was wrong to assume things about your financial situation. And I was definitely wrong to make plans for your apartment without your permission. Thank you for saying that. But I need you to understand something. Her voice began to tighten with familiar defensiveness. Trevor and I really have been struggling. We're behind on credit card payments, our car loan, our student loans. When I saw you at that conference last year and realized you probably had money, it hurt that you weren't helping family members who needed support. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Brianna, what exactly did you think you saw at that conference? I saw you networking with developers and property managers talking about market expansion and investment strategies. You were wearing a dress that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. And from that, you concluded that I owed you financial support. I concluded that you had resources you weren't sharing with family members who needed help. Did it occur to you that maybe I earned those resources through hard work and intelligent investing? Brianna's facade of contrition began to crack. Of course it occurred to me, but family helps family, Susanna. When some people have more than enough and others are struggling, you share. That's what families do. Is that what we do? Because I remember giving up my college scholarship so you wouldn't feel bad about not getting one. I remember stepping aside when you wanted the bigger bedroom, the better graduation gift, the spotlight at every family gathering. When exactly did this family help me? That's different. How is it different? Because you were always going to be fine on your own. You're smart, you're capable, you figure things out. I needed more support growing up because I wasn't as naturally good at things as you were. The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. In Brianna's mind, my achievements were effortless, which meant they didn't count. Her struggles were significant, which meant they deserved unlimited support. Brianna, do you have any idea how hard I've worked to build my business? I'm sure it was challenging, but you're naturally good with numbers and planning. Some of us need more help with financial management. More help like asking different family members for money while telling each person they're the only one you've asked. Her face flushed red. I was embarrassed about needing help. So embarrassed that you lied to multiple family members and created a narrative where I was the villain for not funding your lies. I didn't create any narrative. I just told people the truth about how you were living well while your family struggled. Except Trevor didn't lose his job due to layoffs. He was fired for poor performance. You weren't struggling to afford basic necessities. You were struggling to afford the lifestyle you'd chosen based on assumptions about my finances. Brianna stood up abruptly, her mask of apology falling away completely. So what if Trevor was fired? People make mistakes. That doesn't mean he deserved to lose his job, and it doesn't mean we deserve to struggle while you lived in luxury. I wasn't living in luxury. I was living modestly and reinvesting my profits into business growth. In a gorgeous apartment overlooking the river. In an apartment I own in a building I bought as an investment in a neighborhood where property values have tripled since I purchased it. That's exactly my point. You've been getting richer while we've been getting poorer, and you've done nothing to help us. I studied my sister's face, seeing clearly for the first time the resentment and entitlement that had been building for years. This wasn't about temporary financial hardship or family loyalty. This was about Brianna's fundamental belief that my success was somehow stolen from her. Brianna, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Okay. How much money have you borrowed from family members in the past 6 months? She hesitated, and I saw the moment she decided to continue lying. Just small amounts. Maybe $800 total. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Helen, who'd spent Sunday evening making some calls of her own. The message read, "Final tally from family members $3,200 borrowed in 6 months, not including merchandise returned for cash." Brianna, Aunt Helen talked to everyone yesterday. The actual amount is $3,200, not including the electronics you returned for cash after borrowing money for rent. The color drained from her face. Helen had no right to discuss my private financial arrangements. Your private financial arrangements involved lying to 8 different family members while simultaneously running a character assassination campaign against me. Those aren't private arrangements. That's fraud. I'm paying everyone back with what money Trevor's unemployment benefits ended last month, and according to Uncle Robert, you haven't applied for any jobs since Trevor was fired. Brianna's composure shattered completely. Why is this all my fault? Why am I the villain here? You're the one who's been lying to everyone for years about how much money you have. I haven't been lying about anything. I've been private about my business success, which is entirely my right. It's not your right to let family members struggle while you get rich. Actually, it is my right. I'm not responsible for funding other adults' lifestyle choices, and I'm certainly not responsible for funding a lifestyle built on lies and manipulation. Brianna picked up her purse and walked toward my front door, then turned back with venom in her voice. You know what, Susanna? You've always thought you were better than the rest of us. Smarter, more responsible, more deserving. Well, congratulations. You've got your money and your buildings and your superiority complex, but you've lost your family. Have I just stopped enabling toxic behavior? She slammed my front door hard enough to rattle the windows. An hour later, Marcus called with an update that perfectly illustrated Brianna's character. She's been calling other property management companies in the city claiming to be your business partner and asking for information about available luxury rentals with family discount pricing. How many companies has she contacted? 7 that I know of. Most of them called me to verify her claims because they know you don't have business partners. What did you tell them? The truth. That she's not affiliated with our business in any capacity, and that anyone claiming family discounts should be reported as potential fraud. That afternoon, Trevor called me directly, his voice subdued and embarrassed. Susanna, I need to apologize for my wife's behavior, and I need to tell you something about our financial situation that you deserve to know. Go ahead. Brianna wasn't lying when she said we were struggling financially. We are, but she was lying about why. We've been trying to live like we thought you were living based on the conference she saw you at last year. We bought a car we couldn't afford, furniture we couldn't pay for, took vacations we put on credit cards. Why? Because Brianna was convinced you'd inherited a fortune and were hiding it from the family. She thought if she could prove we needed help, you'd eventually admit to having money and bail us out. The calculated nature of their deception was breathtaking. So the entire financial crisis was manufactured to manipulate me into revealing my assets. Not entirely manufactured. The debt is real, but we created it by trying to force a situation where you'd have to help us. Trevor, that's not asking for help. That's extortion. I know, and I'm ashamed that I went along with it. But Susanna, I need you to know that Brianna hasn't given up on this. She's talking about involving other family members, maybe getting a lawyer to challenge your property ownership somehow. On what grounds? I don't know, but she's convinced that the money you inherited from your grandfather should have been shared with her, and she thinks there might be legal ways to force you to share your current assets. The conversation ended with Trevor's promise to seek counseling for their financial problems and to divorce himself from any further schemes Brianna might devise. But his warning about legal challenges forced me to call Catherine immediately. She can try, Catherine said after I explained the situation. But she'd have no legal standing. Your grandfather's will was clear, your business was built with legitimately inherited funds, and every property acquisition has been properly documented. She'd be wasting money she doesn't have on legal fees for a case with no merit. But she could make things difficult. She could try to create problems, yes. But Susanna, you need to understand something. This isn't really about money anymore. This is about control. Your sister has spent her entire adult life believing she could manipulate you into solving her problems. Your refusal to be manipulated threatens her entire worldview. That evening, I sat in my apartment looking out at the city I'd quietly conquered over the past 8 years. 24 buildings, 68 rental units, and a growing commercial portfolio that provided more financial security than most people achieved in a lifetime of traditional employment. But the cost of that security was becoming clear. My success had exposed fault lines in my family relationships that I'd spent 32 years trying to ignore. Some family members like Danny and Aunt Helen could celebrate my achievements. Others like Derek and Amanda could adjust to new information about our relationship. But Brianna couldn't accept a world where her supposedly weak, compliant sister had surpassed her in any meaningful way. and Patricia was struggling to reconcile her assumptions about her daughters with the reality of who we'd actually become. The question was whether those relationships could be rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect, or whether some family ties were too damaged by years of manipulation and resentment to survive the truth. I was about to find out. 6 months later, I stood in the same apartment where this entire crisis had begun, but everything about my life had fundamentally changed. The city skyline beyond my windows looked the same, but my relationship with my family had been rebuilt from the ground up based on honesty rather than assumptions. Patricia sat at my kitchen island paying her monthly rent in person, as she had for the past 4 months since moving into a smaller, affordable apartment 3 blocks away. This had become our tradition. The first Saturday of each month, she'd bring coffee and a rent check, and we'd spend an hour catching up like adults, rather than mother and daughter trapped in childhood patterns. "I got the job," she announced, sliding the envelope across my granite countertop. "Assistant manager at the community center. It's part-time, but it comes with benefits, and I'll be working with senior programs." "That's wonderful, Mom. How do you feel about getting back into the workforce?" Patricia smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached her eyes. "Terrified and excited. I haven't had a job in 15 years, but the counselor says that's normal anxiety. I start Monday." The counseling had been Patricia's idea, her attempt to understand how her parenting choices had created such damaged family dynamics. Through 6 months of therapy, she'd begun to recognize her pattern of favoring Brianna while expecting Susanna to be endlessly resilient and self-sufficient. "Susanna, I need to tell you something," she continued, her voice becoming more serious. "Brianna called me yesterday." My hand paused over my coffee mug. "What did she want?" "She wanted me to ask you about family Christmas plans. She's hoping you'll agree to see her." I'd had no contact with Brianna since her last visit to my apartment. Trevor had followed through on his promise to seek financial counseling and had taken a construction job with a company that valued reliability over family connections. But Brianna had spent 6 months alternating between fury at her lost opportunity and attempts to find legal ways to challenge my property ownership. Has she acknowledged responsibility for what happened? Patricia sighed. She's in therapy now too, working on what her counselor calls entitlement issues and financial boundaries. Trevor says she's making progress, but slowly. "What kind of progress?" "She got a job at a marketing firm downtown. Entry level, but it's honest work with room for advancement. And she's paying back the money she borrowed from family members, $25 per person per month." I calculated quickly in my head. At that rate, it would take Brianna over 10 years to repay her debts to family members, but the commitment to repayment was more important than the timeline. "Patricia, I need you to understand something. I'm not opposed to rebuilding a relationship with Brianna, but it has to be based on honesty and respect. If she's still looking for ways to access my money or manipulate family dynamics, then we're not ready for that conversation." I understand, and I think she's beginning to understand too, though it's been hard for her to accept that her actions had consequences. We were interrupted by a knock at my door. James appeared in the hallway carrying grocery bags and wearing the easy smile that had become such an important part of my life over the past year. "Ladies," he said, kissing my cheek and nodding respectfully to Patricia. "I brought ingredients for Sunday dinner as promised." Patricia had initially been suspicious of James, convinced that any man dating her successful daughter must be after her money. But 6 months of Sunday dinners had shown her a man who was genuinely proud of my achievements and had his own successful architectural firm to manage. "James, I was just telling Susanna about my new job." "That's fantastic, Patricia. Community center work sounds perfect for someone with your organizational skills." As James unpacked groceries, my phone buzzed with a text from Danny. Still coming to dinner tonight, I have news to share. Danny had become my strongest family ally through this entire situation. His uncomplicated pride in my success and his willingness to call out toxic family behavior had helped other family members recognize their own problematic patterns. Danny's bringing news, I announced. Should we be worried? Knowing your brother, it's either incredibly good news or incredibly complicated news, Patricia laughed. There's rarely anything in between. An hour later, Danny arrived with Amanda and Derek, who'd become regular fixtures at my Sunday dinners since our family revelations 6 months ago. Their transition from tenants to family members who happened to live in my property had been surprisingly smooth, though Derek still occasionally seemed amazed that his mortgage payments were going to his cousin. "So what's the big news?" I asked as we gathered around my dining room table. Danny grinned and pulled out his phone, showing us a photo of a small but charming house with a sold sign in the front yard. "I bought my first house." The table erupted in congratulations. Danny had spent 6 months working with a financial planner to improve his credit score and save for a down payment inspired by my real estate success, but determined to achieve it through traditional home ownership rather than investment. "It's not an empire like Susanna's," he said, shooting me a warm glance, "but it's mine and I earned it honestly." "I'm proud of you," I told him and meant it completely. Building financial security takes courage and discipline regardless of the method. As dinner conversation flowed around topics ranging from Patricia's new job to James's latest architectural project to Derek's promotion at work, I realized how much our family dynamic had improved through honesty. Without secrets and assumptions poisoning our interactions, we'd been able to build genuine relationships based on who we actually were rather than who we'd pretended to be. The evening was winding down when Marcus called with what had become a monthly tradition of his own, a business update delivered over speakerphone, so James and my family could understand the scope of what I'd built. "Portfolio performance this month was excellent," Marcus reported. "Occupancy rate holding steady at 97%, 3 new lease signings, and the commercial property renovation finished ahead of schedule and under budget. Any maintenance issues? Nothing major. Mrs. Rodriguez in Building 7 needs a new refrigerator, and we have some routine painting scheduled for the University District properties. Oh, and I have good news. The city approved our application for the historic preservation tax credits on the Westfield buildings." After Marcus hung up, James raised his wine glass in a toast. "To Susanna, who turned $50,000 into a real estate empire and somehow managed to keep her family intact through the most dramatic property revelation in history." "To family," I corrected, raising my own glass. "To people who can grow and change and forgive each other's mistakes." As my family echoed the toast, I reflected on the most important lesson I'd learned through this experience. Success without authenticity is hollow, but authenticity without boundaries is dangerous. For 8 years, I'd hidden my achievements to avoid family conflict, but hiding success had created different problems. My family's assumptions about my struggles had led them to treat me as disposable and manipulate me for resources I supposedly didn't have. The real breakthrough hadn't come from revealing my wealth. It had come from establishing boundaries about how I would and wouldn't accept being treated regardless of anyone's financial situation. Patricia finished her wine and began gathering her purse and jacket. "Susanna, before I go, I need to say something I should have said months ago." "What's that?" "I'm proud of you, not just for building a successful business, but for having the courage to demand better treatment from people who should have been treating you well all along. I failed you as a mother in many ways, and I'm grateful you didn't let my failures limit your potential." The words I'd waited my entire life to hear brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Mom. That means everything." After everyone left, James and I cleaned up the kitchen together, moving around each other with the comfortable choreography of a couple who'd found their rhythm. "Are you ready for Christmas with Brianna?" he asked, loading plates into the dishwasher. The question had been on my mind for weeks. Brianna's request to join family Christmas had been accompanied by a letter acknowledging her mistakes and outlining changes she was making in therapy. But trust once broken required time and consistent behavior to rebuild. "I think so," I said finally, "but with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. She hurt me deeply, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending it didn't happen." "Smart approach. You've built something beautiful here, Susanna. Your business, your relationships, your life. You don't owe it to anyone to put that at risk." As we settled onto the couch with the last of the wine, I looked around my apartment with different eyes than I'd had 6 months ago. This wasn't just a beautiful space in a building I owned. This was the home I'd created for the life I'd built through hard work, intelligent decisions, and the courage to value myself appropriately. The lesson I'd learned wasn't about real estate or family dynamics or business success. It was about the difference between keeping peace and demanding respect. For 32 years, I'd confused the two, sacrificing my own needs and achievements to avoid conflict with people who should have been celebrating my success instead of resenting it. But I'd also learned that some relationships can survive the transition from manipulation to honesty. Patricia's willingness to examine her parenting patterns, Danny's uncomplicated pride in my achievements, and Derek and Amanda's ability to adjust their understanding of our relationship all proved that family bonds could be rebuilt on stronger foundations. Whether Brianna would ultimately choose growth over resentment remained to be seen. But I'd learned that my worth wasn't determined by other people's ability to appreciate it, and my success wasn't diminished by other people's inability to celebrate it. As James dozed beside me and the city lights twinkled beyond my windows, I reflected on the quiet satisfaction of building something lasting. 24 buildings, 68 families housed 2 small businesses supported through my commercial spaces, and a growing understanding that success without authenticity was meaningless. But authenticity with boundaries, that was the foundation for everything else worth building. Have you ever found yourself hiding your achievements to keep peace with family members who couldn't celebrate your success? Share your story in the comments below and let me know how you learned to balance family relationships with self-respect. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about navigating family dynamics and financial success. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that their achievements matter even when the people closest to them struggle to appreciate those accomplishments. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your success is worthy of celebration, not apology. Until next time, keep building the life you deserve.